Hey folks, Matt Gladman here. And today I'm back with another full fantasy map drawing tutorial. I'm going to show you how I drew this fantasy map drawing. And though it may not look like it, it's considerably simple and more basic than the last tutorial. I personally think anyone who can hold a pen, draw a straight line with a ruler, and some basic shapes like a circle, square, and a triangle, you'll be able to use some of this in your next fantasy map drawing. All right, let's go sketch. We're going to start with our landmass, which I'm going to lightly sketch the shape of our continent in pencil. Once I get a shape I'm happy with, I'm going to refine some of the coastlines. I'm freehanding this landmass, but feel free to pour some rice or beans down on your paper to create a more random shape to your continent. Or even look at some Google images of maps or continents as a reference to natural landmass and coastline shapes. Next, it's on to mountains. And what I do is I draw this jagged line with vertical points. And this will be the ridge line of our mountain range. And before I go in and add any detail, I'm going to be laying out all the features within the continent. So first we laid out our mountain ranges, next I'm laying out some lakes and rivers. And once I'm happy with all the placement of all these natural points of interest, I'm going to lay out where I want my cities built. So I'm just going around and circling the areas that I think would be well suited for a city. Typically near a body of water, so you'll see that I put some near the coast or some near rivers and lakes. Now that I've got the rough placement of my cities figured out, I'm going to go in and I'm going to outline all the areas that I want to be forested. And now we're back to the mountains as we're going to fill in some of the details here. Anywhere that there's a little peak or a corner, we're going to bring these lines down from our ridge line and they're going to just trail off into the ground. And I'm going to lay out a few mountain ranges within this continent, just using that same technique. We're going to run our jagged line down, making sure that we have some vertical points, and that'll be our mountain range ridge line. Just going in and refining all the natural features of this map as I go along. Now, to connect everything together, we've got our roadways. So I'm just figuring out the path and what'll navigate us across this continent. Now, let's dive into creating some villages and cities. Because I know we want to get to the inking in, I'm going to quickly go through all the penciling pieces of this tutorial so that we can get to the really satisfying phase of polishing it all off. Also, I have a specific fantasy map tutorial on how I make villages, towns, and cities for my fantasy maps. So if you want more detail, make sure you go to my channel and check out my past videos. We're going to add some detail to the forest. And these are areas that I'm trying to keep it very simple in design. All it really is a vertical line and an oval on top to create our trees. For my coastlines and the ocean, I typically always add some texture, but this time I wanted to try these horizontal, slightly wavy lines, and I think they turned out great. And it definitely sells the look of, hey, this is the ocean, and here are some waves. Now let's fill in this forest, make it look really dense. And all I'm doing is adding in these little upside down U shapes or arch shapes as treetops. And I'm just filling in this forest area and little clumps. We don't have to do the whole thing to get the idea across that this is a dense forest. Though it's tedious to do 100 of these, this is a style that I feel like almost anyone can draw. Because my goal here is to inspire you to try building your own fantasy world maps, no matter the skill level. Because this grassland transitions to the more northern regions, I'm also going to be adding in a different look for some of the trees here. These ones being more of an evergreen look. So on top of my little vertical trunk, I'm just adding a triangle. Simple, right? Now, the staple for any medieval map, a castle. And I'm just using a ruler to draw some faint lines so that I can keep this castle pretty balanced when it comes to the castle walls, the towers, the turrets, the battlements, all of that. And on my channel, I do have a short that quickly goes through the details of how I go about drawing this classic castle look. Up next, I have my most northern village. It's gonna have a bit of a Viking aesthetic and influence to it. I'm thinking that these houses are mainly made of wood, maybe a bit of stone, and the roofs are either thatched or covered with turf. It's near the coast, has a cluster of dwellings, farmsteads, a longhouse, and it's also surrounded by an evergreen forest. And we're back to filling in another forest. And this one, the majority of the trees are going to be our pointed evergreens, but to keep it dynamic looking, I'm also throwing in a few of those arch-shaped treetops. And like I said earlier, if you check out my channel, I also have a video on how to draw forest and trees for your next fantasy map. It also has a couple simple designs as well as some advanced designs if you want to get a little more intricate. So make sure to check out that video too for more details on how I draw forests and trees. I'm also just going around and filling in any of these natural areas with trees or other vegetation to make sure this map looks full, thriving, and interesting. I also thought, why not throw in a wizarding tower? I'm sure this will be a point of interest for my players that are adventuring throughout this world. So there it is, a wizarding tower among the rocky coasts. Now let's add in a dwarven village. On my last map tutorial, I made the dwarven fortress carved into the mountainside. This time, I'm just making it a dwarven village near the base of the mountains, kind of surrounded by a mountain range. Anyways, we've got sturdy stone structures and strong defensive features. And to change the look up a little bit, I went with more flat rooftops for this. I feel like that makes sense. More square, straight, and sturdy. Let's take this roadway down to create an elven settlement. And unlike the dwarven village, we're gonna have angled walls, really peaked and curved rooftops, flowing lines, large, tall glass windows, and artistic flair. So I had a lot of fun making this village look interesting. Now I'm feeling good about all these settlements that we've laid out. Let's finish all the natural elements and world features to get rid of all that empty space and bring this world together. We'll fill in all our remaining forests. Finish off our wavy coastlines. Add in a few more grassy hills and interesting rock formations. With several different unique biomes and a variety of types of villages and settlements, now we have a detailed world map here. And the final thing we'll do with our pencil is we're gonna name some locations. Now it's on to my favorite part. We're gonna ink this in and make it look polished. So here we go. I'm just carefully and slowly tracing over all my pencil work with pen. Taking my time and being careful because there's no going back from here. And I pretty much just used one thickness of pen and just press it a little bit lighter if I need finer lines, or a bit harder if I needed some bolder, thicker lines. I'm just using a Micron 01 pen the whole way through. I'm just following the groundwork that I laid out previously in pencil. And in this stage, you can make any fine adjustments that you want. It doesn't necessarily have to follow the exact guidelines of your pencil, because that's a rough guide. So just keep your eyes open and be aware for areas that might need adjustment. And if you're unsure, bring the pencil back out, make that adjustment in pencil, and then go over it with pen. Now, enough talking from me. Let's finish up this map. Here we go. And that's it. We just inked in this entire map. Let's add in a continent name, and now we have this map fully inked in. I am so stoked at how this turned out. And friends, remember, this may look complex, but if you just take it one chunk at a time, go slow, do some rough pencil work, we're actually using some pretty simple shapes here. And like I said earlier, I just want to inspire you to build your own world maps. And I would love to see the work that you do. Feel free to send me a message and show me what you're working on. I'd love to chat with other creatives. And there we go. And what probably took me 3 hours total, we have got a super detailed, simplistic fantasy world map. And like always, I want to thank you for giving me your time and watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, or comment on this video. All right, until next time.